Preach the word.
Preach the word. Now we got the Roberts and Orrs back, just like the good old days for the children's sermon. All right. So we got a lot to do, guys. So be following. Okay. So what we've been talking about is justice, and so lex talionis. What does that mean? Not all at once.
Eye for eye.
Eye for eye. That's right. And so the point that I wanted us to understand is that's not about personal vengeance, but it's the idea that the punishment should fit the crime. Okay? And so we've learned about it. The principle we see in Obadiah with the, at least anticipating the final judgment, is God's principle of justice of this right here. As you have done, it shall be done to you. And so we've seen in regards to thieves, and how they should be punished, or accidental damage, we've seen this principle, that the punishment should fit the crime. If I borrow a tool from David Haney, and I break it, there's no evil intent there, okay? So I should restore it, simple restitution. But if I steal a tool from David Haney, now there's evil intent. So then not only should I restore the tool, but I should then pay him double. That what I tried to do to him, I should suffer that same punishment. That's the principle. We've seen it again and again. And so let me read from Deuteronomy and see the same principle once again in another aspect. It says this is in Deuteronomy 19. It says, if a malicious witness, that's like somebody who's out to get you. Malicious, big word, but that's what it means. If a malicious witness arises to accuse a person of wrongdoing, then both parties to the dispute shall appear before the Lord, before the priests and the judges who are in office in those days. The judges shall inquire diligently. And if the witness is a false witness and has accused his brother falsely, then you shall do to him as he had meant to do to his brother. See the same principle? Like when he's trying, if I do something that the punishment would result in Josh Holder getting killed, but it finds out that I'm a false witness, what should happen to me?
You get killed.
I should get killed. If I steal something, if I accuse him of stealing and he should have to pay back, and if he gets found out I'm a false witness, what should happen to me? Should I get killed? No, see, the punishment fits the crime. See, that's the principle, okay? It goes on, it says, so, speaking of in Old Covenant Israel, you shall purge the evil from your midst. And the rest of the nation, they'll hear and fear and shall never again commit any such evil among you. Your eye shall not pity. It shall be, here it is, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, lex talionis. So I just want to emphasize 5 basic points that we see here. Number 1, there has to be a judicial process. It's not mob justice, guys. You take it before the Lord, before the judges. Number 2, we see that it's qualified judges who inquire diligently. This is the way it should be. Number 3, we see a just penalty. Punishment fits the crime. Number 4, there's no mercy in the long hand of the law. There isn't. Okay? Number 5, we see when practiced consistently, it restrains evil. Parents, like when we're consistent with spanking, not the same, but there's a similar principle there. Okay? Now, what I want us to see before we move on is I want us to understand why are we looking at the Old Testament law? I thought we're New Covenant believers. And Pastor Dave talked a little bit about this last week, and I mentioned it, but I want to reiterate and help us to really understand. So this is going to be quick, but you kids are probably pretty familiar with a lot of this because of the catechism. But remember, guys, when we talk about the law, there's 3 kinds of law. There's the ceremonial laws. That's like the animal sacrifice that Pastor Dave is going through in Hebrews. These animal sacrifices, they pointed to Jesus. They pointed to something outside of themselves. And so when Jesus came, we don't do them anymore. They're done away with, okay? And just like if you, on your way to Dollywood, you see signs to Dollywood, when you get to Dollywood, you say, oh man, I really want to go back to the signs. No, you want to be at Dollywood. Now, understand? That's the same way. Jesus is here, guys. We don't go back to animal sacrifices. That's ludicrous, and that's what the book of Hebrews is about. Number 2 is we see judicial, that's how our confession says it, or civil laws. That is, these are laws for Old Covenant Israel. Israel, guys, in the Old Testament is a unique nation. There's no nation like that nation to this day, even modern Israel. There is none. It's a nation that God formed. God was their king. You can't compare any other nation to that nation. And so that's why we recognize these civil laws have ceased. Okay? That's why we recognize that. That there's no comparable nation, and so we don't. And then there's the moral law. So you kids know this much, right? How many commandments did God give on Mount Sinai?
10 Commandments.
10 commandments. What are these 10 commandments sometimes called? Loud.
The moral law.
God's moral law. See, God's moral law is the laws of God that reflect the character of God. Okay? And so God's moral law applies to all people of all time in all places. Okay? And so that's what we... Now, when we're studying like Deuteronomy 19, what I just read, is that a ceremonial law, a judicial law, or a moral law? Adults, help them out. It's kind of our question. Nobody wants it. It's a judicial law. It's a civil. It was a law for Old Covenant Israel. So why are we studying it? Do you see why we're studying it? Because the civil laws usually are a principle of God's moral law. And so the principle, the general equity, we can learn. And so if we want to understand God's justice, we look at those laws, and that's what we're doing. And so that's why when we come then and study, we want to see the three uses of the law now. So, three uses. Pedagogical. That comes from a word from Galatians 3:24. That's a pedagogue. That's a Greek word that means basically teacher. So you could call Miss Brooke a pedagogue. I wouldn't be calling her a mean name. Just saying she's a teacher. And so the law, guys, is a mirror. Okay? And you guys know, I know the kids all know this. I think we all do. The law is a mirror. It shows us who we are. We are depraved sinners who deserve God's eternal wrath. See, we don't think of ourselves like that, but the law comes in and shows us who we really are. And it should, hopefully, drive us to Jesus, our only hope. That's the pedagogical use of the law. Now, that use, is that for believers or for unbelievers? Like, who needs to see their sin, see who they are, and be driven to Jesus? Believers or unbelievers?
Unbelievers.
Unbelievers. Thank you. That use is for unbelievers. That's good for Christians to be reminded here and there, but the point is it's for unbelievers. The next use of the law is the civil use. Okay, that is in the government. It restrains evil. Okay, we saw in the passage we looked at that when God's law is applied, other people will see, and they won't do as much evil as they normally would. It restrains them from, if I could murder someone and get away with it, there would be no consequences. I'd be more apt to murder than if I knew if I murder, I'm going to be executed by the state. You see that? That's the civil use of the law. And remember the quote from John Wycliffe last time? The Bible is for the government, of the people, by the people, and for the people. This is that civil use. Okay? And that's for mainly unbelievers. The law, 1 Timothy 1 says the law isn't for the just, but it's for the lawless. Okay? To restrain evil. And then lastly is the normative use. Okay, this is, here's a quote, the third use of talking about the law of God, the third use is the normative or the moral use, whereby the moral